Nathan Bennett leaned heavily against the wall of the hospital room, his eyes fixed on his son, Matthew. The room was sterile and cold, the soft beeping of monitors a constant reminder of the fragile state his little boy was in. Matthew, barely over a year old, lay almost motionless on the hospital bed, his tiny body wrapped in blankets. His face, once rosy and full of life, was pale, his cheeks sunken. Nathan's heart ached with every shallow breath his son took, the boy's tiny chest rising and falling in a labored rhythm. Emily, Nathan's wife, sat beside the bed, her fingers gently stroking Matthew's hair. She had barely spoken in days, her face a mask of exhaustion and guilt. Her once vibrant brown eyes, which used to shine with laughter and joy, were now dull, weighed down by an unbearable sadness. Emily hadn't eaten much since Matthew had been admitted, and she had barely slept, her thoughts consumed with the same question that plagued Nathan's mind: how had this happened? It wasn't supposed to be like this. Matthew was their world, the little boy who had brought so much joy into their lives. Nathan could still remember the day Emily told him she was pregnant, the overwhelming rush of love and excitement that had coursed through him. They had been married for 7 years, living in the small coastal town of Camden, Maine. It was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone, a town filled with rugged beauty and the scent of salt water in the air. Nathan, a firefighter, had built a life he was proud of, and when Matthew came along, it felt like everything had finally fallen into place. But now, as Nathan stood in that cold, sterile hospital room, watching his son fight for his life, he felt like his world was unraveling. The cheerful, bubbly boy who had once filled their home with laughter was gone, replaced by this fragile, sickly child. It had started slowly, a subtle change in Matthew's energy levels, his once playful demeanor fading. Nathan had noticed it first. Matthew was always tired when they picked him up from Emily's mother, Veronica, who had been babysitting him while Emily returned to work. At first, Nathan hadn't thought much of it. Babies got tired, especially at Matthew's age. But as the weeks passed, it became clear that this wasn't just normal fatigue. Matthew's decline had been gradual but undeniable. He had stopped laughing, stopped crawling with the same excitement he used to. His appetite diminished, and his once rosy cheeks grew pale. Nathan had voiced his concerns to Emily, but she had brushed them off. "It's just teething," she had said, repeating the pediatrician's reassurances. "Babies go through phases." But Nathan hadn't been able to shake the feeling that something was wrong. And then Veronica had mentioned the herbal teas. It was a quiet evening when Emily first brought up the teas. They had just put Matthew to bed, and Emily was sitting on the couch, her feet curled under her, looking tired but content. Nathan had been sitting beside her, flipping through the channels on the TV, when Emily spoke. "Mom said she's been giving Matthew some herbal teas in his juice," she said casually, as though it were no big deal. "She thinks it'll help boost his immune system." Nathan had stiffened at the words, his mind immediately racing with questions. "Herbal teas? What kind of teas?" Emily shrugged, not seeming concerned. "I don't know, just some natural remedies." She said, "It's harmless. You know how she is, she's always into that holistic stuff." Nathan had frowned, his gut instinct telling him that something was off. The idea of giving their 1-year-old son herbal teas without consulting a doctor made him uneasy. "Did she tell you what's in them?" Nathan pressed, trying to keep his voice calm. Emily shook her head, still not sensing the gravity of the situation. "No, but it's nothing to worry about. Mom wouldn't give him anything dangerous. She's just trying to help." But Nathan couldn't shake the nagging feeling in the pit of his stomach. That night, after Emily had gone to bed, Nathan stayed up late, researching herbal teas and their effects on young children. What he found left him even more unsettled. While some herbs were considered safe in small amounts, many weren't recommended for babies as young as Matthew. The potential side effects ranged from digestive issues to more severe complications. Nathan didn't want to overreact, but he knew they needed to be cautious. The next morning, Nathan had gently brought up his concerns to Emily. "I think we should ask your mom to stop giving Matthew the teas," he had said, trying to keep his tone neutral. "I did some research and I'm not sure it's safe." Emily had sighed, her patience clearly wearing thin. "Nathan, you're overreacting. Mom knows what she's doing. She raised me and my siblings, and we turned out fine. You're always so skeptical about her methods." "It's not about being skeptical," Nathan had replied, his frustration building. "Matthew's been acting different. He's tired all the time and he's not eating like he used to. I'm just worried that the teas might be doing more harm than good. Emily had brushed off his concerns, her trust in her mother unwavering. He's teething, Nathan. The pediatrician said this is normal. But Nathan couldn't let it go. His gut told him that something wasn't right, and he couldn't shake the feeling that they were missing something important. Over the next few weeks, Matthew's condition only worsened. His weight began to drop, his skin took on a grayish pallor, and his once bright eyes became vacant. Nathan was consumed with worry, his every waking thought centered around his son's deteriorating health. He brought up his concerns to Emily again and again, but each time she dismissed them, convinced that it was just a phase. It wasn't until one fateful day, when Nathan came home early from work and found Matthew limp and unresponsive in Veronica's arms, that he decided enough was enough. He had rushed Matthew to the hospital without telling Emily, his heart pounding in his chest as he sped down the highway. When they arrived at the emergency room, the doctors immediately began running tests. Nathan paced the waiting room, his mind racing with worst-case scenarios. What if it was something serious? What if they had waited too long to act? What if? The pediatrician emerged from the examination room hours later, his expression grave. "Your son is suffering from acute malnutrition," he had said, his voice steady but filled with concern. "His body is not absorbing the nutrients it needs, and it's putting a tremendous strain on his system." Nathan had felt the floor drop out from under him. Malnutrition? How could that be possible? Matthew ate every day. He and Emily had been diligent about feeding him healthy, nutritious meals. How had this happened? The doctor had explained that the herbal teas Veronica had been giving Matthew were likely interfering with his body's ability to absorb nutrients. The teas, while not inherently toxic, had essentially acted as a diuretic, flushing essential nutrients out of his system and leaving him in a state of starvation. Nathan had felt a wave of anger and guilt wash over him. He had known something was wrong. He had felt it in his gut for weeks, but he hadn't acted fast enough. And now his son was paying the price. When Emily arrived at the hospital later that evening, Nathan had broken the news to her. She had been devastated, her face crumpling as she realized the gravity of the situation. How could this happen? She had whispered, tears streaming down her face. "I thought we were doing everything right." Nathan had held her as she cried, but inside he felt a deep sense of anger and frustration. They had trusted Veronica with their son's care, and she had let them down. More than that, she had put Matthew's life in danger with her reckless use of herbal remedies. As Matthew's condition slowly began to improve, Nathan and Emily were left to grapple with the fallout of what had happened. The doctors had stabilized Matthew, but the road to recovery would be long. His body had been severely weakened by the malnutrition, and he would need weeks if not months of careful monitoring and a strict nutritional regimen to regain his strength. In the meantime, the tension between Nathan and Emily grew. Emily was consumed with guilt, blaming herself for not listening to Nathan's concerns earlier. She had trusted her mother implicitly, and now that trust had been shattered. Nathan, too, was struggling with his own guilt. He had known something was wrong, but he hadn't pushed hard enough to stop it. But as much as they blamed themselves, their anger was ultimately directed at Veronica. She had been the one to give Matthew the herbal teas, the one who had put his life at risk. And while she insisted that she had only been trying to help, Nathan couldn't forgive her for what had happened. Emily, too, was torn. She loved her mother, but the realization that Veronica's actions had nearly cost Matthew his life was something she couldn't ignore. The relationship between mother and daughter, once so close, was now fractured, and Emily wasn't sure it could ever be repaired. One evening, as Nathan and Emily sat together in their living room, the weight of everything that had happened hanging heavily between them, Nathan finally voiced the thought that had been nagging at him for days. "We need to take legal action." Emily had looked up at him, her eyes wide with shock. "Legal action? Against my mom?" Nathan nodded, his expression grim. "She put Matthew's life in danger, Em. I know she didn't mean to, but that doesn't change what happened. We need to protect him, and we need to make sure this never happens again." Emily had been silent for a long moment, her face pale. "I don't know if I can do that, Nathan. She's my mom. She didn't mean to hurt him." "I know," Nathan had said softly. "But she did hurt him. And we can't just let this go. What if she does this to someone else's child? What if she refuses to see what she did wrong? We need to hold her accountable." Emily had buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. "I can't believe it's come to this." The legal proceedings that followed were grueling. Nathan and Emily filed a case against Veronica for child endangerment, a decision that sent shockwaves through their small community. Camden was a tight-knit town, and news of the lawsuit spread quickly. People were shocked that a family so close could be torn apart in such a public and dramatic way. Veronica, upon learning of the lawsuit, was both shocked and furious. She refused to believe that her actions had caused any real harm, insisting that the herbal teas had been harmless and that Nathan and Emily were overreacting. She hired her own lawyers and fought the accusations, determined to clear her name. The courtroom battles were long and emotional. Nathan and Emily sat through hours of testimony, listening as medical experts explained how the herbal teas had interfered with Matthew's ability to absorb nutrients, leading to his severe malnutrition. They presented evidence of Matthew's hospitalization, his weight loss, and the medical reports that linked his condition to the teas. Veronica, meanwhile, remained defiant. She insisted that she had only been acting out of love for her grandson and that she had no reason to believe the teas could cause harm. She painted herself as a loving grandmother who had been unfairly vilified by her own daughter and son-in-law. The case dragged on for months, and as the trial wore on, the strain on the family became unbearable. Emily was torn between her loyalty to her mother and her desire to protect her son. Nathan, too, struggled with the emotional toll of the legal battle. He hated that it had come to this, but he knew they couldn't back down. The day the judge finally delivered the verdict was bittersweet. Veronica was found guilty of child endangerment. While the court acknowledged that she hadn't intentionally sought to harm Matthew, her actions were deemed reckless and dangerous. She was sentenced to probation and ordered to stay away from Matthew for 6 months, during which time she was forbidden from having any unsupervised contact with him. Nathan and Emily left the courthouse that day with mixed emotions. On one hand, they felt a sense of justice, knowing that they had done everything they could to protect their son. But on the other hand, the victory felt hollow. The legal battle had torn their family apart, and the once close bond between Emily and her mother had been shattered, possibly beyond repair. Veronica, too, was devastated. She had never intended to harm her grandson, and the realization that her actions had caused so much pain was something she would carry with her for the rest of her life. In the months that followed, Nathan and Emily worked to rebuild their lives. They hired a professional nanny to care for Matthew, ensuring that he was in safe, capable hands. Slowly, Matthew regained his strength, his bright, cheerful personality returning as he grew stronger each day. The nightmare that had consumed their lives was finally fading, though the scars remained. Veronica, after months of silence, eventually reached out to Emily, apologizing for the pain she had caused. She expressed deep regret for what had happened, but Nathan and Emily remained cautious. While they were willing to forgive, they knew they couldn't forget. It would be a long time before they could trust her again, and even longer before she would be allowed back into Matthew's life. For now, Nathan and Emily were content to focus on their son, on his health, and on the future they were determined to build together. They had survived the worst, and they had learned the hard way that nothing mattered more than their child's safety. As they watched Matthew take his first steps across the living room floor, his laughter filling the room once again, Nathan knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, stronger than ever.